He had his gun, so he just swung it open.
I start to notice that, the atmosphere feels a little bit weird.
First thing he seen was this 6.5 foot tall, broad shoulder, dark hair. That freaked him out.
We hadn't talked to her about like life and death and what any of that means. She's 3 years old,
So we turned around. Suddenly there's a whole tree falling across the road.
And she was describing to us that, there was a deceased person that she could see visually.
You're listening to Cryptid Clues, where we tackle the ever-expanding history and mystery of monsters and supernatural madness every Monday. You can find us at CryptidClues.ca for more information, or even check out exclusive content and support us at patreon.com/CryptidClues.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode of Cryptid Clues. I am your host, Taylor, and today we're going to explore a topic that just recently popped into my mind. I was scrolling through some videos, passing time at lunch one day, and I just came across someone talking about their new job they took up, about relocating into a fire watch tower for the summer months. Now, this was followed by me exploring what people were talking about with this and found several people explaining apprehension for the job. They weren't getting very specific, but it was largely due to just kind of things being a little weird. And I thought, you know what? This is interesting because this is a job I did not really think about in regards to the isolation, being remote in comparison to other remote jobs like truck driver, park ranger, that sort of stuff. So I just want to talk about it a little bit and highlight it. Now, this prompted me to research and share information on these types of jobs that exist and require being mostly alone and remote in the wilds of these national parks or forested areas. But before we get into all that, you can check out more of our content at CryptidClues.ca, our social media feeds, X, Facebook, YouTube, and Patreon. Additionally, if you want to reach us directly, you can do so via cryptidclues@gmail.com. Now let's get down to business. In the past, Reuben and I have discussed previous remote forms of employment where things are seen. This includes, like I said, truck drivers, park rangers, commercial pilots, and many more. But now the idea of forest fire watchers being stationed way out there, it's very intriguing. And from what I could find out, the average station is around 4 months straight in the bush. That's how long your term is. You're not getting breaks unless it's pre-confirmed. Breaks as in time off. If you need to go for a wedding or something like that, you need like a weekend or a week away from your tower. You're living in that watchtower. And it's crazy to think about. You're just like a guy stationed up in Canada, pays not too bad. No benefits though, no union rep. So there's a few cons to this kind of work. You have to apply each year for this job, and that comes with no guarantee of rehire. Now, if you work the year prior and did a good job, again, it does not roll over into guaranteeing you get that job. And this does vary. There are different departments that will have different requirements for these different types of positions. Now, training is minimal. Supplies are flown out to you by helicopter once a month. Again, it varies because some towers are in areas that can be accessed by road. Others are remote. A lot of these are powered by propane generators, so a lot of this propane is flown out once a month. This can differ greatly from the United States fire watch lookouts, which some will require much more intense certification, more engaging activity that involves actually fighting the fires, prevention, and doing a lot of the suppression as well. These positions are not full-time as well, like the previous ones in Canada. It should be of note that not all towers, like I said, are accessible by helicopters. So depending on your station, though, you can get more or less supply runs. Some spots will basically not get water from the supply crew. You're basically going out and getting your water yourself from nearby creeks instead, while the other supplies like food and whatnot is still brought in for you. Now, again, from what I found, it's not too much is to be learned unless you have a direct source from someone who is employed as a fire tower watcher. But again, that's something that it depends totally if they want to share those things. There's a few common things I did learn, and that it's mysterious lights are very frequent when we're talking about orbs. We're also talking about lights in the sky, UFO, potentially UAP, and we've discussed swamp gases playing a part in possible floating orbs in the past. but there is still a lot of mystery surrounding that in itself. If we were wanting anything Bigfoot related, well, I imagine that's more tightly kept. Now, I think that in the end, you have these individuals being very similar to park rangers, where you're up there, you're alone, you may not see things properly. I'm not calling out everyone for, oh, you guys are a little, your mental capabilities are a little shaky. You guys are in these positions and you guys are doing these jobs and you're well-abled individuals. But I do think that when you are alone and you're in this period of isolation, it can eventually play tricks on you. Being in any dark situation, it can play tricks on you. But that is just my own perspective. I have never done this job. I can only speak from my own predetermined perception. Now, there was one individual I chatted with, and they did notice that when they had downtime or they were just kind of watching things, and they could see animals sometimes moving very differently. Again, it was odd, but it was just something that an animal shouldn't be moving around like. And sometimes they would see like the odd animal moving bipedally, which would be very, very weird. But again, that's probably about it. It's very interesting to think about because we've covered certain animals moving bipedally before, and that's something that people can mistake, like, oh, maybe it's a bear. And then all of a sudden it pops up and it's walking bipedally and think, oh, that bear's walking pretty good for something bipedal or four-legged or dogman or whatnot. So that's the extent that goes. And I'm going to be talking with Reuben about this a little bit further and just trying to see, because in one of these episodes that we did, I can't remember which one, he actually was sharing that there was someone up in Alberta, up north, that was basically stationed at a camp, and he was alone. And it wasn't a fire watch tower gig, but it's something similar. He's just kind of acting as security, and at this camp, something started calling out to him, throwing rocks and whatnot, and it terrified him. But I'll have to get more details again on that story and maybe get him to recount it, because he definitely shared it on the podcast. I just can't remember which episode that was, but I digress. Now, another job that I really wanted to highlight is truck drivers. On average, a truck driver will travel 500 to 600 miles per day. Of course, this varies based on route efficiency, speed limits, and breaks that the driver's going to take. And if we're looking at hours, again, I'm no truck driver myself, so all I have is the research, and the average numbers recorded here. 8 to 10 hour shifts a day is what some of these drivers are hitting. Personally, on long all-day road trips, I have to pull over for a 5 to 10 minute snooze just to kind of recharge. The career path of a truck driver is certainly not in the cards for me, but like anyone, staying awake for long periods of time, that level of self-isolation, again, could probably have weird experiences for anyone driving on the road. You might think you're seeing things, of course. It just depends on the person. And I don't mean you're experiencing hallucinations, but I wouldn't disregard it being mentally taxing nonetheless. You certainly can deck out your rig to suit your lifestyle. Now, this is just kind of a cool side tangent. This one trucker I met a few years ago, he let me take a peek at his setup. He had the box attachment so he could sleep while he was driving on the road. Not sleep while driving, but he could sleep, pull over while he was not driving anymore in these remote areas. But basically inside, he had a flat screen TV, he had his internet, he had a PlayStation 5, small kitchenette, he had the bed, everything like that. Like, he had all the fun necessities you could ask for on a long road trip. It was quite stellar, and I was pretty stoked after seeing everything he had set up. Of course, not everyone has that sort of setup or lifestyle, but it's cool to see it. So a driver can get pretty creative with his on-the-road home, you could say. But while they are on the road, there's no shortage of weird things that happen or things that they may see. And I quote, "Upper Peninsula of Michigan. I was delivering and installing machines for the company I was working for. I was in a 26-foot box truck with 12 machines in the back. I was having trouble with the truck the day before, had it checked out by the rental company, and they said it was all good. Since I was behind schedule due to the truck and problems with installations, I decided to drive late to my next destination. It was about 11 o'clock at night on a state route through the Upper Peninsula. There were no streetlights, there was no other cars, and the headlights from my truck were the only thing illuminating the road. I was already creeped out. At the peak of feeling like I was in the middle of nowhere, because I was, in fact, in the middle of nowhere, every single light on the dashboard of the truck lit up, and then it stalled. Now, it's pitch black. I'm stopped, and the truck isn't restarting. Rather than eat up the battery trying to turn it over, I shut everything down and started making phone calls. As I was calling everyone and anyone that would listen, I sat in the dark night with the only light being from my hazard lights. I looked up and saw something move in front of the truck, just out of distance of the flashing lights. At first, I thought it was my imagination. I finally got a hold of someone, and they told me it would be about 2 to 3 hours before they could get a mechanic to me. So now I am sitting in silence. The only noise is the clicking of the hazard lights, and I'm staring out the windshield into a void of darkness when I see movement again. Just as I was about to crap my pants, my phone rang, and that nearly scared the pants being crapped on because it scared the crap out of me. It was a mechanic that wanted me to get out, open the hood, and check some things out. No, I'm not getting out of the truck, with an explanation as to why. He was irritated with me, but I didn't care. So finally, after the movement, just seeing it happen out of range of the lights one more time, I threw on the headlights with my high beams. The headlights caught 3 wolves snacking on something that looked like roadkill. I honked the horn and they looked at me like they were irritated, more than they were scared. I was safe. The wolves were more than likely not going to bother me, but it was just spooky knowing that they were there. So I shut off the lights. I would turn the lights on occasionally to check to see if they were still there. I was basically just sitting there listening to the hazard flashers click while surfing my phone. Each time I turned the lights on, the wolves were still there. Just to remind you, I am in the middle of nowhere. No homes, no businesses, nothing but trees, wilderness, and wolves. I suddenly heard what I can only equate to a woman's scream of terror that sounded like it came from right behind the truck. Then something slammed into the side of the truck hard enough to rock it. I wasn't afraid of the truck tipping over, but whatever hit it hard enough to rock the suspension enough to move me around in the cab. It was a pretty heavy truck. I turned every light that truck had on, slipped it into reverse so the reverse lights came on, and laid on that horn. I was checking both mirrors, and the only thing I saw was a shadow bolt across the road. I couldn't make out what it technically was, but in my head it was werewolf, yeti, Bigfoot, lizard monster that was going to end my life, and it was going to be agonizingly painful the entire time. I also noticed the wolves were gone. From every nature documentary I've watched, the only time predators leave food is when there are bigger, badder predators around. By this time, I was in full Bobby Hill, that's my purse, I don't know you mode. Whatever crossed the road didn't cross very far off the road. I could hear it thrashing around in the brush, breaking sticks, and what sounded to be logs. There was no noise pollution. I only had my window cracked a little bit, and I could hear pretty well. I basically had the steering wheel gripped, all the lights on, and was feverishly looking out the windows. Through the mirrors, make sure that, nothing was around to the immediate area of the truck. I couldn't see off the road, and the flashlights I had were in the back of the truck in my tool bag. I'd have to get out of the truck to get them. Finally, I saw some headlights through one of my mirrors. It seemed like it took hours for them to close the distance to me. The noise stopped as the headlights approached. It was obviously the mechanic because no one else was stupid enough to be out there besides me. The mechanic pulled out in front of me. My headlights were shining on him and his truck. As his door opened to step out, we both hear the woman screaming in terror. Now, the brush thrashing intensified. Whatever it was still close and pissed. His door immediately closed, and my phone rang. He called my phone asking me what it was. He sounded more panicked than me. I had no clue what it was, and he had no clue what it was, so the mechanic called the police. He wouldn't work on my truck until we could secure the area, which I don't blame him. He didn't like my idea of him getting out of his truck just to check things out. 2 Michigan State police officers showed up, and they lit that area up like it was a stadium. I finally stepped out of the truck for the first time since it all started. We heard that scream 3 more times while the mechanic was working on my truck. Thankfully, they were getting further away. The cops had no clue what it was either, and they were kind of spooked too. The mechanic finally got my truck running, and I made it to my hotel for the night. The next morning, I walked the truck for inspection, and the side that was hit, there was an indentation about the size of a basketball. Whatever hit it didn't hit it hard enough to push all the way through, but it definitely mushed the fiberglass. The indentation was about 7 feet off the ground. I have no idea what it was. I probably never will. I do confidently know that I will never ever drive through the Upper Peninsula at night again. End quote. Now, like he says here, we definitely don't know what this is, but we know the possibilities, and we know the location's history. Dogmen and Bigfoot are rich in Michigan lore. A part of me wonders if the wolves are a foreshadowing of things to come, just a slight symbolic symbol. A symbolic symbol. While it was an experience instead of a sighting, what is fact is that something hit the vehicle, and that something had to be at least 7 feet tall. It was fast. Can this person confirm it was bipedal? I don't think so, because they only saw the shadow movement, but we know it's 7 feet tall, and my mind wanders to Dogman. Although the woman-like screams do make me think Sasquatch, but of course we only have speculation, but it's truly a terrifying experience. Now, we have one more truck driver experience here that I wanted to relay to you before we carry on, and I quote, "Years ago in the late 90s, I was on my way from the house, Central Texas, heading to Laredo to pick up a load. It was early morning, around 4 or 5, and I had just come off a string of days at home, so I know I wasn't tired. I'm on one of those 2-lane winding roads in the absolute middle of nowhere, when I see something on the side of the road at the edge of my high beams. At first, I thought, it was overkill or roadkill. As usually the case, as I get closer, I see that it is roadkill, and there's someone crouching over the carcass. I remember thinking either this guy's taking the antlers as a trophy or he's just sick. And as I got closer still, I can now see that this guy is actually eating the deer. He's pulling the chunks of meat out from the stomach and bringing them up to his face. At this point, he stops mid-motion and looks up at me. Not at my truck, but at me. It stands up, and that's when I see it's huge, brown, and covered in hair. And I remember thinking at this point, oh shit. This thing is standing on the tiny shoulder looking at me. By this point, maybe 3 seconds have passed, and I'm about to the point in the road where he's standing at. I didn't even think of stopping. In fact, I'm starting to lay on it and get the hell out of there. As I'm passing it, it's looking at me. Again, not at the truck. It's looking through the driver's side windshield at me. It obviously has the intelligence to know that there's a driver in here and knows where I'm sitting. As I start to pass him, I can see its head above the hood of an old needle nose Pete, an old truck design where the hood goes straight out from the windshield. Known for being tall and difficult to see around, this thing is giant. I remember seeing what looked like just human intelligence in its eyes. It scared the shit out of me." End quote. Truckers, they're driving into these remote areas, places that seldom see much vehicle action, any type of foot traffic really, and it's those remote places that you get these experiences, the things that you really don't want to see. And I imagine that there is a degree of, well, as this individual points out, intelligence. This thing knew where to look and knew where there was a person in this vehicle. And this is not the first time. Me and Reuben have addressed that in previous experiences regarding Dogman. So I think these things, they have that intelligence to know, okay, there's something out here that we can go and, we can go eat this roadkill deer on the road, because what are the odds of another vehicle coming around here? Let's just go down and have some snacks or something like that. I mean, it is risky to be hanging around the roads, but at the same time, when these roads are very remote and you know that, well, no one's going to be driving around here for hours and hours and hours, I guess you can argue with, why don't they just pick up the food and just take it into the bush a little bit? Well, I think it depends. While you're dealing with things that have intelligence, I think you're also dealing with things that maybe have anger and are, yes, predatory. If they find food on the ground, like, okay, this is my area and I'm going to make sure nothing comes around. This is where I'm going to make my base camp and this is where I'm going to hold it. I'm not speaking from experience, of course, but it just, to me, that seems like the kind of play. And these things, Bigfoot, there are good ones, there are neutral ones, there are bad ones, and Dogmen don't seem to be good. They just seem to be bad. Or at least they seem very eager to taunt and play around with people based on the experiences that I have looked into. So moving on, our last experience of this episode. We're following an individual who is leading a troop of middle school kids out camping. And I quote, "I once led a trip to the top of Mount Sterling in North Carolina. It's a tough climb to get to the top, and about 6 miles from the nearest road. I was leading a group of 8 middle school kids and one co-instructor. We were camping out on the top of the mountain. It was a beautiful night with a full moon. The kids and the other co-instructor went to bed in their tents, and I chose to spend the night in a hammock that night. I was really into book reading, and so I stayed up and read until about 10:30 at night when I finally turned off my headlamp to settle in. Everything around me was rather bright from the moon, and from the position I was in, I could see down the trail we had hiked to get to the top. I laid there enjoying the scenery and noticed something moving on the trail. Bears are common in the area, so I perked up. As I got closer, I could tell it was a person. We were in the middle of nowhere, and there was someone hiking up the trail with no headlamp or any gear. I was just frozen watching this person move closer to our camp. They arrived at the top of the mountain where we were and just stopped. I watched as what appeared to be a man surveying our camp. I really could only see the outline of him. He stood there for what seemed 30 minutes, but may have been 10. He then turned and sat down under a tree facing our camp. He was sitting up in a way that I knew he wasn't trying to sleep. He just sat there staring at our camp. I had no idea what to do. I decided to wait it out. I waited, just staring at the man while he stared at my camp, and this went on till about 3:30 a.m. Then he stood up, took a moment to survey my camp a few minutes longer, and then went back down the trail he came up on. I, to this day, have no idea what that was all about, but it freaked me out. I was so paranoid that we were being followed for the rest of the trip." End quote. This reminds me of Sasquatch, of course. Now, devoid of factual evidence, it's the mannerisms that are described that makes me think it's such. But, of course, this person says it's a man, and while they couldn't actually make out any details, they could just call out the outline of this individual. Now, it does not dismiss the fact that there are weird people out there. We did an episode not too long ago where an individual was on their bike and they were going down this road and they heard screams, and there was this thing they saw up on a hill and it was throwing rocks, and they thought it was a Bigfoot. And the actual story here is when the park rangers came in, it was actually a homeless guy that was mentally unstable and was hurting people. It really could be anything, but that's the story that the park rangers went with and told this individual to make him feel that the situation was addressed. In this case, we just don't know what it was, but we know that Sasquatch, they will go into campsites, they will get close, and they will watch and observe. And in this situation where this person's on this hammock, this thing did not know that he was there. It really set him up for a possibly really interesting experience if this thing were to catch wind of him or were to do something. But instead, I think that, well, we don't know it's Sasquatch. At the end of the day, this felt just like a humbling scenario if it was, and it was just there just to observe and just to watch. If it wasn't, and it was a man, that was very freaky. Either way, it's still a freaky situation. If you're in a hammock, you feel exposed, and you see a bipedal thing or person walking up that's not supposed to be there, and it totally just doesn't sit well. Doesn't sit well with you at all. I certainly would not be sleeping for the entirety rest of that night, and I'd be getting those kids and my co-instructor out at first light the next day. So that is it. I digress. I guess in closing, many cases feature being escorted or followed through the woods, but Sasquatch reports, like I said, they intend to include the occasional observation factor. Whether it's fear, curiosity, or something else, who knows, but it's not the first time and it won't be the last. Let us know what you think about these types of jobs, being remote, isolated, working as a park ranger, a teacher going out into the woods with your class, truck driver, fire tower watcher. There's so many different ones, and it's just fascinating the things that kind of go over their heads. And no proper reporting systems either. Well, we discussed that with airlines, and they're still trying to work on a reporting system for commercial pilots that see things in the sky to report to, so they can be cataloged, studied, analyzed, and added to the other huge amounts of piling up evidence. That's the right track, and we're getting there. We're getting there. So until next week, you can find us at CryptidClues.ca, our social media channels, YouTube, X, Facebook, and Patreon. If you wish to reach us directly, you can do so, CryptidClues@gmail.com. Until next time, everyone, take care and stay safe.